You're on the line with Jamal Meeks, former Indiana Hoosier, number 23, 1992. And I'm on the beat with Jim Cole.
Today's guest is brought to you by Reynolds Family Dentistry of Sellersburg. You need $1 million smile for those championship photos, and that's exactly what you'll get with Reynolds Family Dentistry.
The rain, in the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain.
Welcome back to Indiana Sports Beat with Coy O'Leary coming to you on this Monday from the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios, joined now by one of our absolute fan favorites, Mike DeCourcy from the Sporting News, Fox and the Big Ten Network. Mr. DeCourcy, how are you, sir?
I'm well, Jim. How are you?
Doing fine. Todd's here with us. I told him a minute ago, so I wanted to see how long I could go without having Mike on in this time of getting different guests, but it was too much because I said he's too good of a guest to not have him on. So that's why I reached out. A great piece again on the other day. Your stuff is always so timely and important, and I'm like, we got to talk to him about it, man. But
so what you're saying is I'm the functional equivalent of a high cholesterol food. You really want it, but you try to put it off for as long as you can.
Gotta have it, man. But some
so
great
I'm
stuff
pizza
out
is what I am.
Oh man, now you're
everybody's favorite food. Everybody's favorite food. Pizza.
Supreme, man, supreme at that. Name, image, likeness, transferring, allowing kids to return. If not, there's so many things that the NCAA needs to address, Mike, and that are being addressed. But we're in the middle of this weird time of it all that really makes it just a weird situation for everybody, especially the kids involved.
Yeah, I think that most athletes are proceeding under the belief that either the transfer rule will be changed in time for the next college athletic season, whenever that is, hopefully on time in the fall and spring. But I think there's a feeling that if that doesn't happen, then I'll get a waiver. And so I think that has contributed to the volume of transfers. And also, I think what's a little different, what seems to be a little different, I'd have to go and look at it, and it takes like 5 days to look at it, is a year ago I did, and I looked at all the transfers that were on Jeff Goodman's list at Stadium and broke down every single one. And honestly, almost all of them, I mean, not every one, but such a vast majority of them were guys who averaged like 2 points a game or 4 points a game. It feels like, and maybe it's just an anecdotal thing, it feels like there are more significant players that are moving this year. I don't know that for a fact, but when I see a kid like Luther Muhammad leave Ohio State, I'm so baffled as to that development that I wonder if there's something different.
Yeah, I mean, a great example of that. I mean, I think Michigan is kind of dealing with the same thing. I mean, the David DeJulius to me was the one where I was like, I mean, this kid. There was games this year I kind of thought he should have started, and I think maybe he might have thought that also. But I mean, seeing a guy like him who you could almost guarantee is going to be the starting point guard next season at a school like Michigan, and has put his time in. I agree with you. There's some other things going on and some other factors involved in these things. But if that opens up, I mean, Jim and I were talking about this earlier. If that opens up to where there's no sit out time, and a kid could transfer and have immediate playing time at another school. I mean, I see that as just opening up. We'll see kids leaving that you just are shocked at that are leaving a certain school. And I don't know. I'm trying to not be pessimistic about it. But I just don't see how that's going to be a positive for college basketball in general.
Todd, I've written about this in the past, and what's interesting is that like I'm one of the few voices. I think John Rothstein, from a national standpoint, or John Rothstein is of a similar viewpoint, although I don't know whether his reasoning is the same as mine. But the overwhelming number of national voices who speak on college basketball are on the other side of that fence. And what's interesting is that I have presented a very, very strong case for my side, and no one ever challenges me on it, because
Agreed.
The reality is that I'm right. But they just look at it from a baseline of it's not fair. And honestly, it's not unfair. The excuse they give is, well, if you're like a student journalist, or like I was a DJ at my school radio station, okay, and if I had chosen to transfer, then I could immediately be a DJ on the next school radio station. But it's not really the same thing.
No, it's
First
not
of
even
all,
close.
when an athlete transfers, in terms of like if an athlete goes from, say, Indiana State, and I can't think of any famous players who might have done that, there's nothing that stops the player who leaves the Hoosiers to go play for the Sycamores for being a member of the basketball team. He or she is allowed to be a member of the basketball team. They are just not allowed to compete intercollegiately, but they are able to get all the rights and privileges that go with being a member of the basketball team. So I don't think that argument holds up. My argument is that I will not ever support something that is a worse deal for the athlete. And it's a worse deal because you're in a circumstance where you are being you're taken from a system and a coach that you know and put into a system and a coach that you don't know. And you are then immediately asked to play. And you think that's great, but it takes an adjustment period with most players. As well, academically, you lose credits. You lose credit hours on almost every transfer. It's not universal, but it's pretty close. And so the year in residence gives you the opportunity to adjust both academically and athletically. So it leads to better outcomes athletically and better outcomes academically. So how can you say that it's better for a transfer to be eligible immediately?
And right along with that, like you can look at the big time recruits, the guys who are, 5 stars and even big 4 stars, and they go to a school and they're expected to contribute right off the bat and contribute immediately. But what about the guys who are maybe a little less? There's a lot more guys who are 3 stars and lower that you don't really know of that much. And if you've got those guys that commit to a school based on, several factors, the coaches, the campus, the academic things that are offered there, and also who is there and what players are there and what is my ability to be able to play there. Every player doesn't pick a school thinking I'm going to go right in and average 20 a game. He might say, okay, well, they've got a bunch of guys that are going to be graduating next year, and my playing time, my sophomore year, should really ramp up and be a lot bigger. And then all of a sudden now they're allowed to bring in 7 guys over the top of you. And I think they're going to create, for the guys who are, not the very top 25 guys in the country, but the guys who are rated, 25 to 150, I think those guys are going to suffer more. The Keon Brooks guys of the world that are at a place like Kentucky, all of a sudden now, he's in a situation where he's going to have a whole bunch of guys come in right over the top of him right now. And I think that's what's going to struggle with when they talk about unfair. I think they're setting these kids up for a situation that's going to be more unfair than what they have now.
One of the things that I have always liked about the year in residence rule is that if Mike DeCourcy is a point guard who's getting 15 minutes a game at, say, let's say at Penn State, and I decide that I want to transfer to Pitt. Well, okay, so what has to happen for Coach Capel at Pitt to take me is he has to look at me and he has to say, in a year, he can, I have to put a year worth of free education and 1/13 of my roster into this guy, and he can't play a single game for me. So I got to be really sure that this guy is going to make me better, is going to make my team better, and then I'm going to have a real use for him. But if I'm at Penn State and I'm averaging 15 minutes a game, and Jeff Capel needs 15 minutes a game, he can take me and say, okay, yeah, absolutely, you'll play great. And I'm not saying Jeff would do this. Yeah, you'll play lots. Right. And then I come in and I play 15 minutes a game. And what recourse do I have? I have no recourse because you're only allowed to do this once. So it's a bad system. And the disappointing thing about it is to see so many people in my business advocating for a bad system. I have not seen a good argument in favor of this. I've seen tons of good arguments in favor of name, image, and likeness. I saw tons of good arguments in favor of cost of attendance, but this is one that I've never seen a good argument in favor of, and yet the vast majority continue to just side on that side of the fence, and I don't think it's going to be good for either the athletes or the sport. The sport is something that's very important to me, but I start with the athletes. I want them to have a great experience, and I think fewer of them will under this circumstance.
Mike, you bring up the name, image, likeness, another big issue coming up. One of the things that scares me about that is the ability that they're looking at of allowing boosters to actively engage with athletes. What prevents, say, Mark Cuban from having his own minor league team at Indiana, if that is the case?
The one thing that would prevent it is that the NCAA will have a panel that judges whether or not these circumstances are fair market value. So, in other words, if you pay, let's say you're in so Indianapolis. In Indianapolis, you pay Victor Oladipo X number of dollars to help pitch your car dealers, your car dealership. Well, then you couldn't then, for the purpose of recruiting a great quarterback to one of the area colleges or point guard or whatever, you can't then pay X times X or X plus X to that college athlete. And you might even have to, when you think about it, because Victor's a pro and all that, you might even have to establish fair market value, pay X minus Y, say, so that it's a lower figure. So it is still a complicated issue. I was really surprised that was that according to the AP report, I was surprised that was allowed or will be allowed. I did not expect that part. That was the part that I thought they'd fight to keep out, that active and established boosters would be excluded. However, I suspect that the reason that was included was that they don't want people to not be boosters because they want to help get the athlete or whatever. I don't think they want people to say, no, I'm not going to help sponsor your athletic program because I'm really more interested in making sure that you get all the best players. So I will help you in that way. I think they still want those people on board buying ads in the programs or on the scoreboard or on the television broadcasts or whatever.
Yeah, the only scary part, I read that same AP release, and the scary part I had with that is in establishing that fair market value. I understand they're going to have a group of people that specifically monitor those things, but still there's a little bit of a gray area involved in that, and we've seen the NCAA doesn't do great at dealing with gray areas. They're not really fair in how they deal with some schools versus others. And so I hate it when there's not any black and white. This is exactly what the rule is. This is what they can get, and that's the bottom line, because teams are going to stretch that that loophole as much as possible. And I think I'm for it. I'm with you on this one. Like I think this is something that they have to do. Otherwise, the G League / NBA / whatever new league is going to come along is just going to eventually try to squeeze out the NCAA men's basketball or basketball in general. But I think it needs to be a little bit more strict. Otherwise, the fair market value for a guy playing at St. John's all of a sudden in New York is going to be a lot different than the fair market value playing in Minnesota. So it's just I don't know how they can truly keep track of that.
It's an interesting point, certainly. And there was a time when St. John's had an advantage recruiting wise when they had no dorms. They had no dorms at St. John's. It was a full commuter school for years and years, and they built dorms, 20 years ago, maybe something like that. And it took away their advantage because for a while they could pay fair market value for housing in New York, which was exorbitant and still is. And so the athletes would get enormous checks, and then they'd sort of all stuff themselves into one small space, and they'd all make out great. It was a big help for St. John's for a long time. But I think the other thing that was originally in the proposals, and it wasn't covered in the AP story, and I suspect it's probably still a part of it, was that you would not be allowed to use this name, image, and likeness component for either recruiting or retention. So you can't go to a guy who's thinking about do I want to play college another year, or do I want to enter the NBA draft? You can't go to him and say, oh, we'll get you another deal. You can't. I mean, that was originally part of the proposal. Again, I didn't see it in this story. I suspect it's still probably baked into whatever that is that they are going to examine and perhaps pass, because it is important that it becomes it not become institutional. They don't want this to be something that they are actively engaged in as an institution, because then if they do that, then there are Title IX implications. This has to be strictly a player-driven circumstance. I go out and I try to maximize my value as a student athlete. It can't be my institution is trying to either secure my arrival or my retention, because if they do that, then at that point Title IX becomes an issue, and what we expect will be an imbalance. I do believe that there will be, as was the case with Sabrina Ionescu. She would have had significant value as an Oregon athlete under the name, image, and likeness deal. But I do expect that there will be an imbalance, football, men's basketball versus all other campus sports, in regards to what the player's value will be for name, image, and likeness.
Then there's the final wrinkle is if individual colleges, it's going to be allowed that they make the determination of whether or not to include athletic apparel companies. Because you look at Kansas, who's got this $10.5 billion deal with Adidas, and then you've got the haves and the have-nots in there. That's a big disparity.
It's really going to be interesting and a challenge in that regard, because Under Armour at UCLA, you mentioned Adidas at Kansas, and of course Louisville. You look at Kentucky with Nike, Duke with Nike, and it will be interesting to see if that becomes problematic, because we know that over the years that there have been athletes who have had some affiliation through their AAU team with one of the particular companies. And in many occasions, they have continued that affiliation on through the college that they choose. But also, we've seen lots that have said, that this is who got me through to here, and yeah, I'd like to stay with them, but I really need to go to this place. And so maybe I'll get back with them if I'm a pro. But for now, I got to go to this place, and they are a different shoe school. So I do think that will be interesting. If you're at Kansas, do you exclusively recruit Adidas athletes? I don't think so. Too many great athletes under other banners. Do you agree to recruit a guy who's been a Nike athlete and who wants to continue to wear Nike shoes in particular? I mean, obviously you couldn't have a different branded uniform, but it makes for an interesting circumstance that the colleges are going to have to deal with. But they have had at least 2 years warning trying to figure this out, and they speak to those apparel companies all the time. So it's up to them to figure out how to deal with it.
Hey, Mike, one thing in reading through that, and maybe I just haven't gotten deep enough into it to see where they discussed it, but from the athlete's perspective, they're not allowed to hire sports agents and that kind of stuff, or they lose their amateurism and are not eligible in the NCAA anymore. But in dealing with, like you talked about, in dealing directly with this name, image, likeness with particular companies and individuals, are they allowed to hire agents to handle that for them?
Yeah, that was not covered in the story, and I had not seen any indication along those lines whether or not they're going to have to deal with this on their own with no marketing rep or whatever. That's a real challenge, because obviously the young athletes could very easily be taken advantage of. That's problematic, and I think that's something that they'll have to straighten out.
Do the schools set up something where they have their own department, maybe?
When every sports agency in the country, every sports agent that there is that helps these kids, they also either do that themselves or have a department within their company that does that for these guys. So now I can see this opening up for kind of a middleman in between the actual sports agent, and it just opens up. I'm for it. I know you're for it, like you said. I just don't know logistically how you make it work and so that it's fair for everybody, because I don't know how you're going to keep this stuff if these kids are going and negotiating contracts on their own, you're right. Like they're not going to be capable of putting themselves in a good position. We'll have kids that are committed to a certain place until they're 85 years old and not even have realized what they signed. But yeah,
that's a good point.
It just opens up so much stuff.
Yeah, and when the Rice Commission, I guess it was 2 years ago now, came down with their recommendations, I was a little disappointed that their recommendation on the agent element and the subsequent rule that was put in place, I felt like, look, I know, and you know, Todd and Jim, that there are agreements that are well in place with a lot of young athletes between them and agencies. And so I thought, you know what, just put it out on the open because we know it's happening. And so what's the point of having them, like if they want to enter the draft, you sign with an agent during that time, and then as soon as you go back to college, you have to nuke the agreement. It's silly. It doesn't make any sense. I know in large part it's coaches don't want to deal with agents, and I get that. But the reality is that even at that level, they're still dealing with them anyway. Whether it's having to keep them off your campus. So that they don't recruit your players away. And in a lot of cases, it might make for a better arrangement so that the agents doesn't feel that urgency to pull the player out of school before somebody else gets him.
Totally agree.
That he might just say, I know, the kid knows, the coach knows he's not ready for the NBA, and we have an agreement that's in place that I'm going to be his agent, so we're all good. So let's proceed with this. And let the kid develop instead of I got to pull that kid out of school right now because if I leave him there for another 12 months, he's going to meet some other agent and that agent's going to romance him in some way, shape, or form, and then I'm going to lose that client and maybe he turns into something. So I think I think it would really be much better if they just were allowed to have representation and allowed to retain it and just go from there. I know it would create hassles for coaches. That's why they get the big bucks. It's the only answer I can give you.
Mike, man, I cannot thank you as always for joining us. You're just a walking encyclopedia of everything that we care about, and it's just incredible having you on. Seriously, and you're always working on a piece of greatness. What next is coming out for you?
I don't really have a definitive plan at this point. We've been so focused on the draft. I had a whole truckload of coverage on the draft last week, along with the rest of the Sporting News crew. And I've got some ideas that I'm going to kick around, but I'm not putting them out there for anybody else to do. I really don't have anything that's actually in the works right now, but I'm getting, now that I'm off football mode and back into everything mode, mostly basketball, I'll come up with a few things. But if you want to read my draft coverage at TSN Mike, I had some fun things on there. The Sporting News draft coverage for the NFL was really terrific. I was really proud to be a part of it in what's a difficult time for everybody in the media business. I thought our crew did a really bang up job.
Make sure you go check it out. There's nothing but the best, and that is exactly what Mike DeCourcy, the best. We appreciate you so much, Mike. Thank you for your time and joining us.
Jim and Todd, it's always a delight. Thank you so much.
This is Jim Coyle from Indiana Sports Beat with Coyle and Leary. Indiana Sports Beat is now a part of the Rivals Network. You can go to thehoosier.com to sign up. It's free. Catch the show there each day live or at your convenience. You can also like or follow us on Facebook, follow the show's rebroadcast anywhere you podcast. If we're not on a radio station where you live, we should be. Let your local station know they need to carry Indiana Sports Beat with Coyle and Leary, or simply go to thehoosier.com.